I'm Richie, and I'm joined by my co-host Mark. On the show each week at Friday at 8 a.m., we speak to a remarkable individual about their journey through their lives, talking about both their highs and lows to really understand how they were able to achieve what they have. Now, this week, we have another very special guest who is a renowned figure across the British business scene, perhaps best known for his appearance as Sir Alan Sugar's right-hand man on The Apprentice. However, to get to that position, Claude's accolades extend far beyond the show, and in his own right has had an exceptional career in many different ways. He is a business owner, entrepreneur, and even floated companies such as the Power League. He was also the CEO of Tottenham Hotspurs, in what I can say is pretty much every child's dream to achieve. So whether it's running some of the UK's most renowned companies, to leading a major Premier League football team, and even appearing as one of the UK's leading TV shows, it would seem that Claude has really done it all. And just when you think there is no more he can conquer, the University of West London names their business school after him. Well, look, on a personal note, I just want to say that above and beyond all these great achievements, I have found Claude to be an extremely kind-hearted and individual. And he is very generous with his time. He sees the positive in so many things and gives off a real sense of optimism that is really needed at this point in time. So it's without further delay that I really welcome Claude to the show this morning. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Morning, thank you.
Mark, over to you for the first question.
Morning from me as well, Claude. Fantastic to have you on the show. So to get us started, in many ways, let's start at the beginning. So you were born in New York, but came to the UK where you've spent most of your life. Can you tell us what it was like for you growing up, perhaps some of the early lessons that took you on the path that you subsequently went on?
Well, I think I was very fortunate in that, first of all, I had very, very nice, wonderful parents. So I think that from my point of view, I always had a very stable kind of upbringing. My problems, however, started quite early when I went to the French Lycée in South Kensington, which was a very good school, but was not good for me in that it was very strict and I was quite rebellious. So from quite an early age, I found it quite tough going. And unfortunately, once you get into the French system of education, it's very hard to step out. So in spite of sitting for lots of very good schools in the UK, I found they rejected me each time because actually I didn't understand the whole English culture. I didn't know about English history, being stuck in the sort of French system. So I had a difficult time at school, and that actually resulted in doing rather badly when it came to exams. So I was always frustrated that I wanted to do well, but somehow just couldn't manage to make it. So whilst I had a wonderful upbringing at home, my home life, my family were wonderful, school was very challenging for me.
You know, Claude, so it really epitomizes the fact that you don't need to be an academic to then go on to do well in your career and further life. Is that one of the lessons that you've taken away from that early experience?
Well, certainly, if I had my time again, I would certainly wish that I could have done better at school. I possibly would have been less disruptive, I would have paid more attention, and hopefully I could have done a bit better. But I think what it taught me is that even if you are not good academically, you've still got to, in my case anyway, just means you've got to redouble your efforts. So, you know, if it meant taking my O-levels or whatever it is, twice, 3 times, whatever it is to get the grades, I was determined to find my way through. And so I've done that all along as my first degree, my master's. I was just persistent, not a great student, but persistent. And I think that's what's held me through my career, is just being doggedly persistent, not willing to give up, not knowing what losing is like. I just wanted to succeed. And it's just by real effort and sheer stubbornness that I found my way through, I think.
Yeah, well, that probably is what most parents want of their kids more than anything these days, is they have a bit of a work ethic, because there's no substitute for that grit and determination. And so when you were charting the early stages of your career, who were your inspirations for the decisions you took?
Well, I've got to say, having said how wonderful my parents were, I have to say my father and mother, because my father was in business and he was a very gentle businessman. And by that I mean he wasn't trying to become a multimillionaire or achieve greatness, but I think he was very client focused. Very much business was something he wanted to do to provide for his family. So I think his values were very strong values, and that, with my mother's value of keeping my sister and I close to each other and the family generally close, I think were wonderful examples which have carried me through my life in terms of behaving appropriately, behaving properly. If you're in business, for example, and things aren't going well, and most of the businesses I've been in have not gone well because that's why they've called me in, it's a matter of being fair. You've got to do tough things sometimes, but I think if you do it in an honourable, honest way, I think somehow you feel okay about it, and the painful message you have to carry across is somehow more palatable.
Claude, as part of that, what I've certainly seen is that you've got an immense amount of what people say fire in the belly. And do you think that sort of come from some of those earlier setbacks in your early sort of schooling career, or where do you think that sort of come from?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that because I was a failure at school, I think that kind of made me determined to try not to fail later on in life. And I think that also, and this is something that's particular to me, I didn't want to disappoint my parents. So I know it sounds like a bit silly, but really I was always wanting to make up for the fact that they'd been disappointed with me in my earlier education. And so I was just quite determined to try somehow maintain their priorities, but also try and find some kind of financial success, something that would make them proud of me.
Claude, it's very refreshing that you talk so freely about the challenges and failures you've had along the way, because obviously many people try and conceal those. But let's flip that around for a moment and talk about some of the successes. So you started your career as an accountant, but since then have had a vast and varied career. Can you tell us about some of the highlights as you see them?
Well, the highlight for me really is, and this goes back to my sort of lack of confidence, if you like, is that what I found was that nobody was going to give me a job where there was a flourishing company that was doing spectacularly well. What seemed to happen was that I would get jobs where the company was failing, and they thought, all the good guys had left and failed, and they thought, right, well, it's a last-ditch attempt, let's bring Claude in. I mean, the company's dead already, how much more damage can he do? And lo and behold, I was able to, and I'm moving along here, but I was able to actually do some good to the company, restore some value, maintain employment for the people, and try and find a way of actually securing the long-term future of the business. So, that came really after I'd left Unilever, where I started my own business. And there's nothing really like starting your own business and understanding the trials and tribulations, the loneliness, the disappointment, the fact that things take longer, cost more, and just general upheavals. And so, I mean, I'll just tell you one example. I'm jumping around a bit, but I started this business in an area that I didn't know too much about. And I had concessions within Burton's menswear. And I was just doing selling ties, belts, menswear accessories. I then had an opportunity to go into Bourne and Hollingsworth, Bourne's, and I had a small concession there, which was also doing menswear accessories, doing really well. So even though I was down in the sort of lower depths of the department store, doing tagging and all that kind of thing, and stabbing my fingers with these guns as I was pricing things, I was so determined to try and make a success of this business that I was prepared to do anything at all, just to kind of make a go of it. And actually, the business did start to flourish. But on one particular occasion, I was offered the opportunity of taking over an area next to my concession, which was menswear. So this was my first venture into actually menswear. And so I bought a whole load of shirts, and they were going really well. So I went back to the wholesaler, bought a whole load more shirts, because I could see every time I sell a shirt, I'd make £2 or something like that. And then one day I said to the manager, I came in at midday, I said, my God, there's no shirts left. We've done really well. He said, no, they all got nicked. And so kind of you think you're doing well, you're getting, everything's going well, and suddenly you get a disappointment. And so I think that's what business is like to a certain extent. You've got some hard work, you've got some highs, and then sometimes things just come along and derail you. But you've got to be resilient. And I think in life, you've got to be resilient. Things happen, and I think you've just got to kind of try and overcome them.
Claude, you talk about the one of your real desires was to kind of make your parents proud, and I think a lot of us sort of feel like that and have an underlying motivation around that. But with that, also comes sort of the other side of the coin, which is the risk factor in trying to make these businesses succeed. And a lot of the time, if you try and kind of create a business that sort of has a path to success, it comes with the potential of actually risking too much. So how do you see that risk reward equation playing out, particularly in the business environment?
Right. Well, I've always been and still am very risk averse. If I was more of a gambler, if you like, I could have done a lot better, or actually I could have lost everything. So from my point of view, and I go back to my father's principle, if you like, contentment and feeling secure is more important than going for the extra, whatever it happens to be. So however, when it comes to companies, that is quite different, because I, as an individual, am risk averse, but companies have got shareholders, and they've got, if you're a public company, for example, you've got to be seen to be growing the company, ever growing the company. So I think that there's a different philosophy when you look at companies where you've got to grow. If you don't grow, if you don't change, if you don't adapt, if you don't innovate, you are going to fail more than likely over time. So I think when it comes to businesses, I've always been very, very keen, wherever the business kind of started off, if you like, when I entered, I've always tried to stabilize the business, learn from the people who are in the companies from whom I can learn a lot, and then guide the company through to growth, strength, and more prosperity. So I think that's the way that I've kind of managed things. But I'm at heart, I'm not a risk taker.
So, Claude, just building on your point about coming in when all seems lost, we've got a question from Thomas. Actually, I'll read what he says first. It says, "Hi, Claude, I read your book and it was great. Probably the first book I finished in 3 years." So there's a good opener. Anyway, so Thomas...
Did it take 3 years to read it? Is that what you're saying?
He wasn't specific, but
right.
let's assume he whizzed through. But he said he
Yeah.
had the opportunity to try to turn around a company, but found he was shut out by people who had been there for years. So his question is, how do you really take control of a business and go about reinforcing a position in the company, especially with long-serving directors and employees?
Yeah. Very, very hard. I've had situations where my best efforts have been thwarted because you've got die-hard directors who won't change, who won't move in the way that you want, or you've got shareholders who, instead of being passive, decide to suddenly get busy. It makes life very, very difficult. I completely sympathize with that case. The situation is really either you go or they go, because you can't both stay unless you can reach some accommodation whereby they understand what you're trying to do and they're prepared to give you a chance to make sure that what you're doing is right. But you often meet resistance, and sometimes you meet resistance because people are scared of change. And they do things a particular way, they're comfortable with that way of doing things. If somebody comes along and takes a radical different view, inevitably they're going to resist it. So it's almost like human nature. I've had situations where I've had to win over directors and managers and just ask them to give me a chance. And sometimes I've just had to sort of part company with them because there's no, or I've actually been the one to say, look, I can't manage with the situation. So I think you've just got to assess the situation, see what you're working with, see whether you can make a go of it, and be realistic about whether you can actually work with certain people. And in lots of cases, things have not worked out. And so I think it's an unhappy marriage, if you like. But where the converse of that is where you have a team who are willing to change, who understand the direction they've been in is not right, and they're prepared to work with you to move the company along. Joy, because actually you've got somebody or a team of people you can rely on. They rely on you, and innovation comes through, good ideas, hard work, genuinely hard work comes through. We're all working off the same hymn sheet, so to speak, and we've had success, great success in some situations.
Claude, I often get advice, well, two opposing pieces of advice when it comes to entrepreneurship. On the one hand, people talk about the need to stay the course and run the course of the business. On the other, people say, well, you've got to know when your time's done and to get out. How do you balance those two equations, particularly when you've seen some of your turnaround experience?
I think what I do is even though I love the business I'm in at the time that I'm trying to do the turnaround, there comes a point in time where I recognize that my work is done. And I think I don't get emotionally upset about leaving a company. I'm happy that I've managed to take the company from A to B, and if somebody else then takes it to the next stage, that doesn't bother me at all. I've never been, if you like, short of work, so it's a matter of really doing the best I possibly can during the period that I determine or somebody else determines that I'm doing the right job, and then I move to the next opportunity. And I like the challenge. So there are always challenges in business, but I particularly like the challenge of saving a business, trying to rescue it, trying to get it back to some kind of former glory, or moving it to a different space. Once that's done, I think there are different people who perhaps can take it to the next level. So that's just kind of my way of thinking. And when I do leave a company, sometimes the company thrives after I've left, and sometimes they go back to their old ways maybe, and it doesn't do so well. But at least during my period, during my tenure, I think I've improved certain situations.
Love that. Thank you.
So, Claude, Richie mentioned you were CEO of Spurs, and that many people would love to have such a job. Such is the place of football in our nation's hearts. So, tell us a bit about. That must be fascinating. How do you get to have that job? What does that job entail? What's the good and bad parts of such a job?
Okay. Well, from my point of view, it was very, very fortunate getting that job, and I wasn't looking for it. I've always been a Spurs fan, by the way, but clearly Alan Sugar became chairman, and I'd been working in Alan Sugar's companies as chairman of some of the subsidiaries around Europe, and my job there came to an end. I didn't know it was coming to an end, but Alan said, "Look, I've got something else for you," and we've been talking about a number of opportunities that he had within his business. And he said, look, what I'd like you to do is I'm having all kinds of troubles at Spurs with Terry Venables and with just general sort of problems. You go in and you sort it out. And I said, no. I said, oh, no. I said, that's not what I want. That's not my career path. That's not what I want. We've been talking about a whole load of other things. I don't want to go into Tottenham. He said, look, you're the only one who can do it. I think he was flattering me. Just go and do it, sort it out. Get rid of all the sort of fraud, the problems, the sort of just the bad things about it. Because at core, we've got it's a public company as well. At core, this is a fantastic franchise, a fantastic business, and we can turn it around and make it great again. Sounds like America, so I did go in there, and it was a wonderful challenge. I have to say that. You're in the limelight, and obviously being a Spurs fan, it was a magical opportunity to just go down the tunnel, go into the dressing room, and just be part of the community that is football. Whether you go to Manchester United, they're incredibly welcoming. You invite them back, we're incredibly welcoming. So there's a whole culture that goes on behind the actual 11 guys playing football. However, it was actually my worst experience in business. Because what I missed the fact that a football club isn't just a business. It's got a heart and soul that is part of the fan base, part of the football management aspect of it. And so I went in there very blinkered, thinking it was just another turnaround, and focused much too much on the financial side, which was important, very, very important. But I didn't understand the soul of a football club, and all football clubs have got that soul, which is kind of totally apart from the financial situation, the management of business. It's all about the football, the support, all those kind of things. And if I had my time again, I would do a much better job than I actually did at Spurs. But having said that, I did some wonderful things. I'm being hard on myself. We did turn the company around. We did do some very good things. But I think that in retrospect, where I haven't got a lot of regrets about some of the other companies that I've been involved with, I think Tottenham, either I was too naive or too young or not mature enough to understand the whole situation about football. And also what you've got the newspapers, and we were at Spurs, we were very, very, it's a leaky ship, because I'd say something in all innocence, which I'd say in a company, like, why do we get these referees from up north? Can't we have local referees? Now, to anybody who knows about football, of course you can't have a local referee because he might be biased. But I was asking silly questions, and of course any silly question was immediately fed into the Daily Mail, the Sun. So on the following day, I'd sort of have all kinds of comments about how stupid I was and making such ridiculous comments. But I was just trying to fact find. in my innocence. But of course, the newspaper loved all that.
Do you know, Claude, I think that the two things that have really resonated on your point, and probably these are experiences that have stayed with you through the rest of your career. One clearly being the heart and soul that's embodied that club. Potentially, has that sort of helped you kind of move on and think about other businesses in that sort of way and look for the heart and soul when you're looking for that turnaround as well?
Well, I think what happened to me was at Tottenham. I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I had cancer. So the lessons I learned for Tottenham were somewhat clouded, if you like, by what actually happened to me personally. And so I think that what happened, if you like, since Spurs is that I've become quite a different person. I think I'm still tough and uncompromising, but I have a kind of a bit more soul about me. And so I think I've realized my mortality, and I've learned a lot of lessons from that. So I think that I'm much less aggressive, much more composed within myself. So that fire that you talked about right at the beginning is a different kind of fire. It's a much more relaxed and more composed situation. Maybe it's a function of age as well, that you kind of mellow a little bit. You've seen lots of things, you've gone through lots of challenges, and perhaps the way that you tackle them is somewhat different.
Claude, so I'm just fascinated about your journey through non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. My wife, for many, many years, was a nurse in a bone marrow transplantation ward, and she talked about the mental approach to healing and fighting that. If you can, tell us a little bit more about what that battle was like.
Well, I think the battle really was more to do with my family, because if you're a patient, basically you don't have too much say in what you're going to do. When my oncologist said, come into the hospital, because he'd seen some test results that weren't very good, I would say something like, look, can I pop in next week? And he said, no, come right now. And so I think from my point of view, I was just a victim. But I think the hard task was for my parents, my wife, my children, my family and friends. They had to see somebody who was really, kind of just losing the life. And so I think that was the real challenges for me. There's nothing I could do. I was just there to be done whatever was going to be done to me. But for my family, it was hard to see all the physical and mental changes that were taking place. But it was a pretty horrific experience, and it went on for quite a long time because they thought that they sorted out the problem from loads and loads of chemotherapy, but then a short time later it came back. So I think it was a very, very tough time for everybody concerned. But I was very fortunate in that I had fantastic nurses. In fact, I've still got the names of the nurses who looked after me all those years ago, because they, even though they'd done their shift or whatever it is they'd done, they came and sat on my bedside and talked to me. And I just found the whole medical situation, the whole way the doctors, the nurses, even the staff administration, the guy who was, welcomed me when I walked into the hospital, it was fantastic. So I think all those things, and my fighting nature, just saw me through things. But I do think that it was a strength again of my family around me that helped me to get through the tough times. And I think that I thought I was going to die, but I thought I was going to be quite brave about it. And so I don't think I showed any lack of spirit. I was determined to fight, but I think the problem and difficulties were more with the people who were supporting me.
Claude, I just want to say thank you really for sharing that. It's really appreciated. I can't imagine what you must have been through, but it really shines through that the spirit that has literally encapsulated your personality has really held you and creates that even through some of the toughest times in your life. So thank you for that. I'd like to go to a question from Lisa. So Lisa asks that you've had an amazing experience in the corporate world. What can charities and non-for-profits, we were discussing this just before, so what can charities and non-for-profits learn from your experience? Many are struggling right now. And how can we help them bounce back?
Well, I can only speak from my perspective in that I'm very amenable to all opportunities to help charities. So quite clearly, I'm very involved with the blood cancer charities. So that's one of my obviously areas of particular interest. But there's lots of other charities where if they've asked me to give a talk, to give a breakfast talk, or to just go on a podcast or do a Zoom call, whatever is required, I generally am very, very prone to help on that. And I think that particularly this time where it's very, very hard to fundraise for them, I'm more than happy to do what I can to help them. I think that's all anybody can do. So, for example, Blood Cancer UK, that's a charity that I've been involved with for many years, but there's lots of other charities where if I can lend a hand, if I can do something to help, I'm more than happy to do so. What they can do individually, because it's very, very tough. I mean, I know that there's charities where they've had to lay off people, where they haven't had the funding to go to put the to get sort of tests done. So what's very important is that you test these sort of formulas, not just like we're going through now. These viruses and have got to be tested, not viruses. What's the word I'm looking for? Whatever they're trying to do to cope with the virus, they have to do trials, and so it's very important that you've got to pay for these trials to get them in trial to prove that the vaccine works. And so to that extent, it's very important that funding does carry on for charities, because without that, it's unlikely that they're going to get the testing through and the trials through, which will enable us then to have a vaccine that helps us to overcome some of the diseases.
Thank you, Claude. Very quick one just before I hand to Mark. I've got a question, very related, one-word answer, two-word answer from Pin Van Loon. Would you ever work for a government or non-for-profit?
Absolutely, absolutely. My position in life now is that I'm not looking for earning money for profit. If I can do some good, and if I feel that I genuinely, whatever my abilities are, can help, I'm more than happy to look at it. So absolutely.
Thank you, Claude.
Okay, so we're rather overburdened with lots of good questions. We'll try and get to as many of them as we possibly can. But I want to change tack slightly towards The Apprentice. Is sort of the obvious place to go next, maybe. And just tell us, what was it like being on The Apprentice?
Well, first of all, I didn't know I was going to be on The Apprentice. And Alan just approached me one day and said, look, I'm doing The Apprentice. Do you want to do it? And I said, well, yes, okay, yes. So he then says, right, so this is what you're going to do. You'll do the interviews. I didn't know what the interviews were about particularly. But if Alan was sort of suggesting it to me and he was all excited about it, then it looked like something worth doing. And I think at the beginning, none of us knew what we were letting ourselves in for. I remember the first interview I gave was in a tiny little cubbyhole of an office, and all they had was one camera focusing on the candidate behind my shoulder. And then once the questions had been asked and the candidate had answered, the camera moved around, and all I had to do was nod like that or shake my head like that. And so it was very, very much seat of the pants stuff. Over the years, it's become complex and wonderful. Not that it wasn't wonderful in the early days, but it's become very professional, very, very slick. Alan Sugar is fantastic. Karen is wonderful at what she does, and I try and do my bit. And so really it's become something that I never imagined it could possibly be, in terms of the palaver that goes around, that goes with television. So from the early days when it was just one cameraman, you've got a team of cameramen, you've got fantastically talented people who are in production, who make the whole show come alive. The editing is brilliant. The amount of work that Karen and I do is also absolutely exhausting. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about what time we get up in the morning, but when the candidates have to get up at 4:30 or whatever time it is in the morning, Karen and I, separately I might add, have also got to get up and be at wherever we have to be. And we wander around all day with the candidates, logging everything they say as best we can, and then giving important information to Alan Sugar on an hourly basis as to how things are going. So it's not easy, but it is a tremendous honour to be involved with a show like The Apprentice. And the enthusiasm that everyone has for the show, and of course the viewers who kind of follow, and it's like different generations of viewers, is fantastic. So I regard myself as being incredibly lucky to be involved in such a show and to have been there since the inception.
You know, Claude, it's funny because I think The Apprentice is one of those very few shows that cut across generations, bring people together. and actually inspire multiple generations to kind of come together in the week, and then also kind of start to kind of spur their own entrepreneurial sort of mindsets as well, which is fantastic. I've got a question here, a little bit of an inside scoop. And so Eileen asks, as a big fan of The Apprentice, I would like to ask Claude if himself, Karen, and Lord Sugar have any input in deciding the content of how the final film editing of the tasks are edited. And do you all view the finished filming cut before you enter the boardroom?
I don't know what you mean by the finishing cut. We don't see anything. So basically, it's live. So whatever happens, happens. Behind the scenes, Alan, Karen, and I do sit together to discuss who did well on the task, what things went wrong, who do we think should get fired, and try and explain why we think that. And so, for example, what happens is that we might say candidate A is going to get fired, and Alan says, yes, I can see that, you've explained it to me, I can see what you've told me. We never see anything, we never see any film. There's no way that we are, but we were there, Karen and I were there, and Alan is in touch with everything all the time in terms of listening to us. But then what happens is we get into the final boardroom, and Karen and I focused on candidate A is going, but when we get to the final three, candidate A might make a very good defense of the situation, explain what went wrong, explain that he wasn't the culprit, he wasn't responsible for the failure, he or she wasn't responsible for the failure of the task, and Alan will then take that, because he's got like a computer mind, like brain, he'll then compute all that and decide that B is going to go. And so we're all thinking, hang on, it was supposed to be A. But so things can change, but there's no way that it's pre-organized in terms of we see the rushes of what happened during the day. We see nothing. And the winner, obviously, Alan then chooses his winner. But it's based not on a whim, but based on all the weeks that they've gone through the process, the actual interviews, which are very, very important in terms of clarifying whether their business plan is suitable for investment and whether the individual can manage that business plan. And so that's the way it actually goes. And people say, oh, is there a script? There's absolutely no script. You say what you want to say, how you want to say it, and that's it. And I do remember on one occasion I did say something which will actually be on TV tonight, where I throw somebody out of the interview, and because I was so enraged, I just lost it with that individual. And the moment those words came out of my mouth, I regretted it. I regretted not that I had to get rid of him, but the way that I did it. But once it's done, it's done. And that's the beauty and the danger of The Apprentice, is that there's no rehearsal, there's no script. You just go for it. And the same thing for the candidates. They say things that perhaps are inappropriate. Sometimes it gets cut and edited out. But what's said is said. What's done is done.
Well, we'll certainly be watching that tonight for sure. There's one follow-up question from Stephen. Is there a candidate that you would have hired that maybe Lord Sugar didn't? So I suppose, does he get it right 80, 90, 100% of the time from your point of view?
Well, obviously, I have to say he gets it right 110% of the time in Apprentice terms. But it's a fine judgment call, really. I think when you get to the top, the people who go in for the interviews or the last three, they're all worthy candidates. They're all worthy of winning. And so it's really a fine judgment as to what Alan sees in an individual, or whether he particularly likes that industry. So the winner last year was bread, making bread, and that she was a very worthy candidate. But I think Alan just fancied that industry, and so she became the worthy winner. And so I think that there's never any argument, really. All Karen and I want really is to make sure that Alan has chosen the best candidate, and he then makes the ultimate decision as to who he wants.
Sounds great, Claude. I've got another follow-up question. Keeps coming from Thomas Stewart, and it's a lovely question, actually, very quite apt. So you're obviously a very friendly gentleman. It's absolutely true. Concur. How do you feel when you watch back some of the Apprentice scenes, especially the interview process, when sometimes the show conveys you as a man to fear? Did you interview your employees in the same way?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to say that the Apprentice interview is not a normal interview. I would hope that if I interview people in real life, I'm far more of a gentleman, and I take things differently, because in a normal interview, what you're trying to do is it's a two-way process. You're trying to find out if that candidate is going to fit into your organization, and they're trying to find out whether they can work in that particular way. So it's very much a two-way process. It's more relaxed. You still have to ask questions. You still want to listen to the answers, but they also have the opportunity of challenging you and asking you what it's like. Because the worst thing is getting the job, me appointing the person, and then after a month recognizing that I've made a mistake or they've made a mistake and we part company, and then you've got to go through the whole process all over again. So the apprentice interview is quite different. First of all, I get to ask the questions. They know what the job is. It's £250,000 and a partnership with Alan Sugar. So it's really me putting them under a great deal of pressure to challenge their business plan, to make sure the numbers are right. And typically their numbers are not right. And just making sure that the business that they're proposing is a viable business, because in their heart and mind, they might think it's a viable business, but not every business is viable. Sometimes it's a hobby. Sometimes it's an unrealistic projection they're making in terms of what the company is going to do. And sometimes the individual is flawed, and therefore we're all flawed, but the individual is flawed in terms of being able to actually manage the business that they're proposing. So for all those things, if I come over tough, it's because time is short. I need to get to the core message. I want to put them under pressure, and it makes good TV.
Yeah, that's the killer point at the end. So a lot of what you talk about, Claude, is the balance between being soft and being hard. And there is obviously a balance there. We've got a provocative question from Power, and a good question. So in turbulent times, is micromanaging a better leadership trait than delegating?
Is what? Is
micromanaging a better leadership trait than delegating?
No. It's horses for courses. It depends on the business you're in. It depends whether you've got a team that you can rely on, in which case things can go a lot more smoothly. But if in fact you haven't got confidence in your management team, or you're going through really perilous times and every penny counts, every decision has an implication, then maybe you have to go down to micromanaging. But that's not the way to run a business, by micromanaging. If you micromanage, you can only do a small amount. You've got to take a step back, give managers the opportunity of doing what they do best, letting them get on with it on the basis that there's an understanding that if they get into trouble, if they go beyond their remit, they're going to come back to you to ask what you would do. So I think it's very much working in concert, and I think that's the best way of managing a business. But obviously, if you're in tough times and you really are down to the wire, you've just got to go back to that situation of micromanaging, but it's certainly not a way to run a business.
Claude, we're almost out of time. We've only got 5 minutes left, and I really would like to get some insight from you. And I know you obviously work a lot with the University of West London. And right now, we all know that young people and people, say, midway through their careers might be going through a lot of turbulence, and perhaps the worst is yet to come. So what kind of advice would you give people at this point in time to help them through?
Look, I think generally, the problem with this country is that we've got a wonderful population. And I say that because there's all kinds of terrible things that are happening, but generally speaking, we're a lovely, nice country. But what I think we're missing is some skills. So I think that people have got to recognize that times have moved on, that there's a skill which is required now that perhaps wasn't required 10 years ago. So I'm a big fan of continuous education, so to speak. And I think it's important for people to get skills. Not everyone can be an academic. I know that from my own experience, but you've got to find the things that you are good at and try and see whether those things are applicable to today's world. And that's where it's important. Universities particularly have got to adapt very quickly. There's no point in the business school teaching a load of old rubbish about what happened in business in the 1960s. It's all very interesting, but here things have changed. The requirements of industry has changed. They don't want candidates who come out of university and have got an academic background without a practical side to it. So it's very important that whatever you're doing, if you're involved in the university, it's practical. And also, I think that let's not forget that people who aren't academic, it's important for them to get a skill, learn a skill, retrain. It's very difficult, but you've got to, in this world, I think, adapt. And there are loads of people who and that's where the apprentice comes back to being very relevant, who are not going to go into industry for one reason or another. They want to start their business, whether it's a technology business, they've got a clever idea. And nowadays, you can start a business from your home. You can start a business from your bedroom. So I think it is important for people to explore opportunities. Sometimes what you thought was you were doing well at 10 years ago, life has shifted on and you have to shift with the times. So I think it's important for individuals to keep training, continuous training, keep your eye on what's required by your company to make sure that you're always relevant. And if not, it's always good to perhaps take a course so long as it's relevant and you're interested in it. And that way, I think you're going to be more employable in whatever the situation is. But these are very, very hard times. And certainly if I was in my 20s or 30s, I'd be very worried about making sure that I had the right skill set for what's ahead of us, which is full of change, full of innovation. So I think it's not easy, but I think you're just going to keep plugging away and trying.
Claude, you give such good advice that I'm going to sneak in one more question before we close. From Barney, actually. Thank you, Barney. So you referenced the need for fairness when leading a business, particularly through difficult times. More generally, what other traits do you think makes a great leader?
Okay, I think that it's good to have charisma. Not everyone's got it. I'm not sure how I've got it. But I think what you've got to do is for people to realize that you're honest, that you have got the best interests of the business at heart. You make mistakes, and that's absolutely fine. We all make mistakes, but actually, you're not self-serving. You're not trying to do something because it gives you an advantage, but it is a matter of really taking the team with you, communication, explaining to everybody what you're trying to achieve, listening to what people have got to say, because you think you know it all, but you don't. A lot of people have got a lot of great ideas. So if you can be open to listening, although you're going to make the final decision, you are directing the company, I think that will stand you in good stead. So communication, contact, being a human being, being fair, reasonable. I always have my door open, which is a pain in the neck. People keep coming into my office and disturbing me, but that's what business is about. And I'd rather find out about a problem early on rather than find out too late or find out much later when things have gone wrong. So it's a matter of being personable, but understanding that there's a business to run here and it's not a joke. Business is not a joke. People's livelihoods can't be sort of toyed around with. And so I think that it's just a mix of using your personality, but generally doing the best for the company rather than just doing the best for yourself.
Love that, Claude. And keep your door open is something that really, that phrase really resonated with me just now. So thank you for that. Claude, look, we're completely out of time. We've had such amazing questions come through from the audience and I dare say better answers to responses to those questions. So it's an absolute pleasure to have had you on this morning to talk about some of your experiences. I really genuinely want to thank you for the vulnerability that you've actually shown this morning. It's been really, truly inspiring for all of us to listen to part of your journey. We see the man on the TV, but we rarely get to see what's behind. And actually this morning, you've really shown us what is behind. And it's been an absolute pleasure. So I'll pass over to Mark for some final words as well.
Yeah, thanks, Richie. Yes, Claude, I mean, we've had a flood of warm and lovely comments in the chat box. I'm just going to read out one from Claudia very quickly. So, Claude has a refreshing, positive attitude. In these times, we could all benefit from emulating his attitude. A healthy mental approach is important. From my perspective, you've demonstrated warmth, honesty, integrity, vulnerability, and also about how to be a decent human being. So I just can't thank you enough. I think we have seen a lot that many people don't get to see about you as a whole person. So I can't thank you enough. Your time has been fantastic and everyone really appreciates it very much. Thank you.
Right. It's been my absolute pleasure, and thank you all, and thanks for your questions as well.
So thanks, Claude. Just as a final close for everybody, as you know, we'll be here same time, same place next week. And the amazing guests keep coming. So I'm really thrilled that we've got Sue Unerman on the show next Friday. She's Chief Transformation Officer at Mediacom, a key role in the enduring success of what is the biggest media agency in the UK. We've also previously had Karen Blackett and Claudine Collins as well from that organisation. So look forward to seeing you next week. But for now, have a great weekend and thanks again, Claude.
Thank you.